The sky was on fire, and so was the city of Pasadena. Amid the chaos and destruction, one man stepped into the flames, Snoop Dogg. But what could a music legend do against a raging inferno? Stay with us to witness a story of courage and compassion that will leave you speechless. And tell us, where are you watching from? The sky over Pasadena was an ominous orange, casting an eerie glow over the city. Smoke billowed in thick plumes, choking the air and blotting out the sun. Ash fell like snowflakes, settling on empty streets as families fled their homes. The once bustling neighborhoods of Linda Vista and Hastings Ranch now stood eerily silent, their streets lined with abandoned cars and hastily packed belongings. Snoop Dogg watched the live news feed from the safety of his Los Angeles home, his heart sinking with every image of destruction. Flames licked at the edges of homes, and firefighters in heavy gear battled the inferno with every ounce of strength they had. The scrolling news ticker spoke of evacuations, shelters overflowing with frightened residents, and heroic efforts by first responders. "Man, this is bad," Snoop muttered, leaning back in his chair. His phone buzzed with messages from friends and family checking in, but his eyes stayed glued to the screen. He saw families huddled together, their faces streaked with soot and fear. Kids clutching stuffed animals, firefighters collapsing from exhaustion. He felt a knot tighten in his chest. This wasn't just another disaster happening far away. This was here, his city, his people, and sitting on the sidelines didn't feel right. As he sat in silence, the news shifted to a segment showing the urgent need for supplies in local shelters. "Water, blankets, food, anything helps," the anchor said. Snoop reached for his phone, pulling up his social media accounts. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before he began typing. "Pasadena needs us, y'all. Let's step up. I'm heading out there myself. Who's with me?" The post went live, and within seconds the responses flooded in. Friends, fans, and followers pledged donations, shared the message, and offered to join him. Snoop glanced back at the TV, where firefighters were silhouetted against a wall of flames. He grabbed his keys. "Time to do something real," he said to himself. As Snoop drives toward Pasadena, what dangers will he face, and how can one man make a difference amid such overwhelming destruction? As the night deepened, the air around Pasadena grew thicker with smoke, and the glow of the fires painted the horizon a fierce orange. Snoop Dogg leaned against his SUV outside the shelter, his face illuminated by the pulsing blue and red lights of emergency vehicles. The chaos around him was relentless. Volunteers rushing supplies inside, evacuees arriving in waves, and firefighters coordinating their next moves. For a brief moment, doubt crept into Snoop's mind. He had stepped into the middle of a disaster zone, but what could one man really do? The enormity of the crisis seemed insurmountable. He scrolled through his phone, reading messages from friends and family urging him to leave. "Get out of there, man. It's too dangerous. You've done enough. Don't risk it." He exhaled slowly, his fingers hesitating over the screen. Part of him wanted to listen, to turn around and drive home to safety. The fires weren't just a threat to homes. They were unpredictable, deadly, and spreading fast. His thoughts were interrupted by a firefighter stumbling toward the shelter, his gear covered in soot and his face streaked with exhaustion. Snoop recognized him. It was Captain Ramirez, one of the leads on the firefighting team he'd met earlier in the day. "You all right, Cap?" Snoop asked, stepping forward. Ramirez shook his head, his voice hoarse. "We're stretched thin. The fire jumped the line near Linda Vista. We're evacuating houses there now, but it's bad, real bad." Snoop's stomach tightened. Linda Vista wasn't far from the shelter. He glanced back at the evacuees, families clutching what little they had managed to grab, kids curled up on blankets, volunteers trying to keep order. "You need more people out there?" Snoop asked, though he already knew the answer. Ramirez looked at him surprised. "You don't need to go out there, man. It's too dangerous." Snoop hesitated, the weight of Ramirez's warning sinking in. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't a firefighter. What could he possibly do in the face of an inferno? Before he could respond, the sound of a child crying caught his attention. Turning, he saw a little girl clutching a stuffed animal, her cheeks streaked with soot and tears. Her mother knelt beside her, murmuring reassurances, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. Something clicked in Snoop's mind. He wasn't here to watch or to stand on the sidelines. He had the platform, the resources, and the will to make a difference, and now was the time to use them. Ramirez sighed, as if reading Snoop's thoughts. If you're serious about helping, we could use an extra pair of hands. Just be careful. Snoop nodded, his resolve hardening. Tell me where you need me. As Snoop prepares to enter the fire zone, what dangers await him? Will his determination be enough to make a difference, or will the risk prove too great? The sound of the roaring fire grew louder as Snoop Dogg followed Captain Ramirez toward the staging area on the edge of Linda Vista. The scene was chaotic. Fire trucks lined the streets, hoses snaked across the ground, and firefighters yelled commands over the deafening crackle of the flames. The glow of the fire was so intense, it cast eerie shadows across the neighborhood, turning night into an apocalyptic twilight. Snoop's eyes scanned the area, taking in the scale of the operation. Ramirez led him to a temporary command post, where a weathered firefighter in his 60s stood hunched over a map spread across the hood of a truck. His face was lined with years of experience, and his uniform bore the marks of countless battles with blazes like this one. Chief Harris, Ramirez said, introducing him. This is Snoop Dogg. He's been helping out at the shelter, and he's volunteered to lend a hand here. Harris looked up, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Snoop. You've got guts coming out here, but this isn't a game, he said bluntly. These fires don't care who you are. They'll take everything you've got if you're not careful. I hear you, Snoop replied, his voice steady. I just want to help however I can. Harris studied him for a moment before nodding. All right then, you can help us get people out. There are still families in these houses who haven't evacuated. If you're serious about this, stick with Ramirez, follow orders, and don't try to be a hero. Snoop nodded. Understood. Before they headed out, Harris placed a firm hand on Snoop's shoulder. Listen, these fires, they've got a way of testing people. You'll see things out there that'll stay with you. But you focus on the people. That's why we do this, to save lives. The words settled heavily in Snoop's mind as he and Ramirez moved toward a group of firefighters preparing to enter the fire zone. One of them handed Snoop a mask and gloves. It's not much, but it'll help, the firefighter said with a nod. As they approached the first street, Snoop's heart pounded. The heat was suffocating, and the air was thick with smoke and ash. He could feel the intensity of the fire even from a distance, its flickering edges moving ever closer to the homes that dotted the hillside. They reached a small house where the lights were still on. Ramirez pounded on the door. Fire department, is anyone inside? A faint voice called back, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. The door opened, revealing an elderly couple holding on to each other. We didn't know where to go, the woman said, her voice trembling. Snoop stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. We'll get you out of here. Grab what you need, just the essentials, and follow us. As they helped the couple to safety, Snoop felt a growing sense of purpose. The fear and doubt he'd felt earlier began to fade, replaced by determination. Harris's words echoed in his mind. Focus on the people. Returning to the staging area, Snoop was approached by Harris again. The veteran firefighter gave him a small, rare smile. Not bad for your first time out there, Harris said. Appreciate it, Chief, Snoop replied, but there's still more to do. The flames roared louder as the wind shifted, pushing the fire line closer to the heart of Linda Vista. Snoop Dogg and Captain Ramirez moved swiftly down a narrow street, checking each house to ensure no one had been left behind. The suffocating heat was relentless, and every breath through Snoop's mask felt like inhaling sandpaper. House looks clear, Ramirez shouted, stepping back from a front porch as Snoop followed him. But as they turned to head to the next street, a panicked voice rang out from further up the hill. Help! Please, someone help us! Snoop didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the sound, with Ramirez close behind. They found a woman waving frantically from the second-floor window of a small home, her two young children clutching her shoulders. Flames licked at the edges of the property, and the surrounding air shimmered with heat. The stairs are blocked, she cried. We can't get out. Ramirez grabbed his radio, calling for backup. Engine 22, we've got a family trapped at 416 Maple Drive. We need ladders and a hose team now. Snoop scanned the yard and spotted a ladder leaning against a neighbor's fence. Without thinking, he ran to grab it. Ramirez hesitated for a split second before nodding. "Go, I'll keep the fire back." Snoop positioned the ladder beneath the window, steadying it as the flames crept closer. "All right, let's get you out," he yelled. The woman carefully helped her children climb down one by one, their small bodies trembling as they reached the ground. Finally, she descended, her hands gripping the ladder tightly. The moment her feet touched the pavement, Snoop grabbed her arm. "Run! Get to the fire truck down the street." As they dashed away, the fire surged forward, consuming the house in a deafening roar. Snoop's heart pounded as he watched the family reach safety, but there was no time to rest. Ramirez shouted over the radio, "More houses are at risk further up, let's go." The challenges didn't end there. At the next block, they encountered a group of neighbors who had refused to evacuate, determined to save their homes with garden hoses and buckets of water. "You need to leave," Ramirez yelled, his voice firm. "The fire's too close, it's not safe." "We're not leaving," one man argued, his face red from both heat and anger. "This is our home." Snoop stepped in, his tone calm but resolute. "I get it, man, but your life's worth more than your house. You gotta trust me on this. Let the firefighters do their thing." The man hesitated, his grip tightening on the bucket in his hand. Snoop met his eyes, his voice softening. "You can rebuild a house, but your family can't rebuild you if you don't make it out." Finally, the man nodded, dropping the bucket. He and the other neighbors began moving toward the evacuation zone as the flames advanced. Throughout the night, Snoop worked side by side with firefighters and volunteers, evacuating homes, distributing supplies, and comforting families. His presence brought a sense of calm to the chaos, his steady voice and determination inspiring those around him. By dawn, the fire line had shifted again, and the immediate danger in Linda Vista began to subside. Exhausted but relieved, Snoop returned to the staging area where Chief Harris was waiting. The fires were finally under control, leaving behind a trail of devastation, but also stories of survival, resilience, and community. For Snoop Dogg, the experience had left an indelible mark. Days after returning home, his body still ached, and his voice remained hoarse from inhaling smoke, but his mind was racing with ideas on how to continue helping. The first step was mobilizing his fan base. Snoop used his social media platforms to share what he had witnessed, the bravery of the firefighters, the heartbreak of displaced families, and the urgent need for long-term recovery efforts. "The fires might be out," he posted, "but the work isn't done. Let's keep showing up for our communities." Donations poured in, inspired by Snoop's words and actions. Within weeks, he partnered with local organizations to launch a disaster relief fund, directing resources to rebuild homes, support firefighters, and provide counseling for those traumatized by the events. At a press conference held in Pasadena, Snoop stood alongside Captain Ramirez and Chief Harris. The crowd gathered to thank the firefighters, volunteers, and all who had risked their lives. Cameras flashed as Snoop stepped up to the podium, his usual charisma tempered with humility. "This ain't about me," he began, his voice steady. "It's about all of us coming together when it matters most. I saw people risking everything for each other out there, firefighters, volunteers, even neighbors who refused to leave until everyone was safe. That's the kind of love and strength we need every day." The audience erupted in applause, but Snoop wasn't finished. "We can't stop here. Rebuilding takes time, money, and heart. So let's keep pushing, keep helping, and keep showing up, because that's how we make it through, together." Over the next few months, the impact of Snoop's efforts rippled through Pasadena and beyond. The Disaster Relief Fund provided grants to families who had lost everything, while local shelters received the supplies they desperately needed. Snoop even returned to Linda Vista and Hastings Ranch to visit the neighborhoods he'd helped save, reconnecting with the families and firefighters he'd worked alongside. One afternoon, as he stood in a rebuilt park in Hastings Ranch, surrounded by laughing children and parents, a young boy approached him. "Mr. Snoop?" the boy said, tugging at his sleeve. Snoop crouched down, smiling. "What's up, little man?" "Thank you for helping us," the boy said, his voice quiet but sincere. My mom said you saved me. Snoop placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his heart full. You're welcome, kid, but don't forget. You're part of this too. You're the reason we all came together. As the boy ran off to join his friends, Snoop stood and looked around at the community coming back to life. It wasn't perfect, and there was still work to be done, but it was a start. And for Snoop, it was proof of something he'd always believed: the power of compassion, action, and showing up when it mattered most. Sometimes, it's not about what you have, it's about what you do. And when we come together, there's nothing we can't overcome.